The air caught in my throat like a shard of glass the moment the lock clicked open. I wasn't supposed to be in Mom's study, definitely not digging through the heavy mahogany box she kept tucked away behind the forgotten winter coats in her dressing room closet, but the feeling had been gnawing at me for weeks. That cold, calculated look she gave me every time I asked about my childhood, those vague answers about baby illnesses and faded memories. It was all a lie, I knew it. But I never imagined the scale of the deception. I found the antique key hidden inside a jewelry box filled with costume earrings, a strange place for something so important. My hand trembled as I lifted the heavy lid. Inside, it wasn't diamonds or old love letters. It was a single, slightly faded photograph, protected by tissue paper, and a pristine white envelope sealed with wax. I picked up the photo first. It showed my father, Mark, looking impossibly young, his eyes full of tenderness and pride, holding a tiny, bundled baby. That baby was unmistakably me. But the woman standing beside him was not Sarah, my mother. This woman had deep, dark hair like mine, eyes that mirrored the specific shade of hazel I saw in the mirror every morning, and a smile so genuine it made Sarah's usual strained expression look like a mask. She was beautiful, ethereal, and she was holding Mark's arm protectively. I stared at the image, dizzy. Who was this woman? And why, in 22 years, had Sarah never, ever mentioned her existence? The envelope lay heavy in my hand, threatening to expose a truth that would shatter the foundation of my entire life. My hands were shaking too hard to open it immediately. I jammed the photo and the envelope back into the box, slammed the lid shut, and replaced the key, running from the room before Sarah returned and caught me breathing the air of her terrible secret. I felt like an intruder in my own home, a ghost wandering through a story that wasn't mine. I spent the next 48 hours observing Sarah, trying to piece together the narrative from her nervous mannerisms. She was usually a fortress of calm, a woman who controlled every aspect of her world, but now, a flicker of anxiety haunted her sharp eyes. She was checking her phone constantly, avoiding direct eye contact with me, and making endless, pointless trips to her study, the scene of my discovery. I realized I couldn't confront her yet. I needed proof beyond a single, ambiguous photo. I snuck back the next evening, waiting until they had gone out for one of their dreaded, obligatory society dinners. This time, I took the photo and the envelope out, slipping them carefully into my backpack. I needed to analyze every detail. The woman in the picture, the one who wasn't Sarah, wore a silver locket. It was distinct, etched with a flower I recognized, a bluebell. I flipped the photograph over, my heart hammering against my ribs. In tiny, elegant cursive, faded but legible, were 4 words, Lila and our Anya, 1999. My birth year. Lila. Not Sarah. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Sarah had always told me her name was on my original birth certificate, but that she'd lost the document years ago. Now, a new, terrifying possibility emerged. Sarah wasn't my mother at all. She was simply the woman who raised me, the woman who had deliberately erased my biological mother from existence. The thought made the blood rush from my head. I felt sick. I looked at the picture again. Lila looked so vibrant, so real. How could someone erase a person so thoroughly, so completely, that not even a memory remained? I had to find Mark. He held the key, the only person who could explain why the woman he claimed to love was also the greatest liar I had ever known. The moment Mark walked through the door later that night, smelling faintly of expensive scotch and cigars, I cornered him in the kitchen. He was tired, already loosening his tie, but when he saw the desperate urgency in my eyes, his fatigue seemed to vanish, replaced by a deep, immediate fear. "Dad, we need to talk. Now. Alone." I kept my voice low, but the tremor in it must have alerted him. He looked over my shoulder nervously, checking for Sarah, whose heavy footsteps I could already hear on the staircase. I pulled the photo from my pocket, holding it out silently. Mark's face drained of color. He didn't even need to touch the picture. His eyes fixed on Lila's smiling face, and his entire body seemed to slump, aged 10 years in a single second. "Anya, where did you get this?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "It was hidden. By Mom." "Who is she, Dad? Who is Lila? And why does the caption say our Anya if Mom is Sarah?" I demanded, trying to keep the hysteria out of my tone. He stammered, running a hand through his graying hair. It's complicated, sweetheart. It's the past. It doesn't matter now. Sarah is your mother, she raised you, that's what counts." His refusal to acknowledge the truth, his instant reversion to Sarah's narrative, enraged me. "It matters to me. You look happy in this photo. Who is the woman who looks exactly like me?" Before Mark could formulate another weak excuse, Sarah appeared, gliding into the kitchen, her expression instantly hardening as she took in the scene, the terrified husband, the accusatory daughter, and the damning photograph. She didn't shout. She didn't even raise her voice. She just gave Mark a look of such concentrated venom that he physically recoiled. "Mark, I think it's time for bed. Anya, put that old junk away. It was a mistake, I kept it. Get over it." Sarah's cold dismissal didn't put an end to the conversation, it simply solidified my resolve. That night, I couldn't sleep. Her casual labeling of my biological mother as old junk sent icy waves of fury through me. I realized that Mark was deeply compromised, trapped by Sarah's manipulation and control. If I wanted the truth, I had to find it myself, and I knew exactly where to start looking: the sealed white envelope. I waited until 3 a.m., ensuring the house was silent. I slipped out of my room, creeping down the hallway to Sarah's study. The lock on the mahogany box was cheap. I had managed to pick it earlier using a hairpin and sheer adrenaline. I retrieved the envelope. The wax seal, bearing Sarah's initial S, felt hot beneath my fingers. I carefully broke the seal, trying not to tear the heavy paper. Inside was not a letter, but 2 official documents folded neatly: a certified death certificate and an original birth registration form. I unfolded the birth registration first. Father, Mark Vance. Mother, Lila Vance. Date of birth, April 14, 1999. Child's name, Anya Vance. My breath hitched. There it was, undeniable, official proof. Sarah's name was absent. She was not the mother. I was the daughter of Lila Vance, the woman in the photo, and my father. I then looked at the death certificate. Name, Lila Vance. Date of death, May 2, 1999. Cause of death, postpartum complications. Lila died just 18 days after giving birth to me. The sadness that washed over me was profound, not just for the loss of a mother I never knew, but for the life and truth Sarah had stolen. I gripped the documents, the hard evidence that would finally free me from the lies that had defined my existence. But I still didn't understand why Sarah, the second wife, had gone to such lengths to hide Lila, unless she had done something truly unforgivable. My hands shook so violently that the paper crackled as I held the death certificate. Lila had died 18 days after I was born. Sarah had entered the picture shortly after, taking on the role of mother to a newborn baby who wasn't hers, a child whose very existence was a painful reminder of the love Mark had lost. It explained the distance, the emotional coldness, the constant subtle criticisms. It was all rooted in resentment and the deep, possessive need to erase the ghost of Lila. I needed context, a deeper understanding of the timeline and Sarah's motivation. I remembered seeing a separate, small, leather-bound book wedged deep beneath the legal documents in the mahogany box. I rushed back to the study and retrieved it. It was a diary, personalized with the initials LV Lila Vance. I flicked through the fragile pages, my vision blurring with tears as I read Lila's delicate handwriting. She detailed the joy of pregnancy, the fear of complications due to a pre-existing condition, and her deep, trusting friendship with Sarah, who was apparently a distant cousin and a close confidant. Lila wrote about her hope that Sarah would help Mark if anything happened. But as I read later entries, the tone shifted. Lila wrote, just a week before giving birth, about Sarah visiting and asking too many questions about the will, about guardianship, about my future. She described Sarah's strange, almost desperate attachment to the nursery. It became clear that Sarah didn't just step into a role, she targeted it. The tragedy of Lila's death opened a door, and Sarah had walked right through it, sealing the door behind her with years of lies. This whole time, the coldness I felt from Sarah wasn't just personality, it was the manifestation of a woman trying to love a child that belonged to the woman she envied and sought to replace. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? When is the act of raising a child considered true parenthood, and when does it become possession, fueled by jealousy and deceit? If you've ever had a relationship where you felt someone was trying to rewrite your history, tell me about it in the comments below. I'm starting to realize just how deep this kind of betrayal can run. The diary entries became harder to read, moving from Lila's joyful notes to Mark's grief-stricken scribbles following her death, and then abruptly, the entries stopped. The following pages were empty until a new, aggressive handwriting appeared. Sarah's. She hadn't just hidden Lila's history, she had repurposed Lila's diary as her own private ledger of resentment. Sarah documented the early days of raising me, how difficult it was, how everyone compared me to Lila, how Mark couldn't look at me without crying because I was Lila's spitting image. Sarah wrote about the pressure to be the perfect wife and mother, and the increasing paranoia that Mark would eventually leave her for the ghost of the past. One entry stood out, dated 6 months after Lila's death. Mark said he wants to keep a portrait of Lila in the living room. I told him absolutely not. If I am to be his wife, I am the only woman allowed in this house. This child is mine now. Lila is dead. Her memory must die too. That line chilled me to the bone. It wasn't a spontaneous act of love and protection, it was a hostile takeover. Sarah systematically scrubbed every trace of Lila, old photos, letters, gifts, and finally, my own birth narrative. I realized why Mark was so timid and terrified. Sarah hadn't just been raising me. She had been blackmailing Mark with the threat of abandoning him and me, leaving him heartbroken and alone again, if he ever defied her narrative. This was not a family, it was a prison built on control and fear. I looked down at the photo of Lila again, this time seeing past the happiness to the incredible tragedy. My mother, beautiful and kind, had trusted the wrong person, and that misplaced trust had erased her legacy. I decided right then that I would not allow Sarah to win. The truth, however painful, deserved to be acknowledged, and Lila deserved to be remembered. I gathered all the evidence, the photo, the birth certificate, the death certificate, and the diary. It was time for the final curtain call. I chose a Sunday morning. They were both sitting in the sunroom, drinking coffee and reading the financial section of the paper, projecting an image of comfortable, successful domesticity. I walked in, not crying, not shouting, but with a quiet, lethal composure that stopped their casual conversation immediately. I placed the stack of papers precisely in the center of the glass coffee table. "I know," I stated simply. Mark dropped his coffee cup, the ceramic shattering against the marble floor, but he didn't move to clean it up. His focus was entirely on the documents, his face a mask of shame and fear. Sarah, however, remained unervingly still. She looked at the papers, then at me, her sharp eyes calculating her next move. "What is this drama, Anya? Clean up your father's mess and sit down." Her dismissiveness was the final spark I needed. I picked up the death certificate and read the name aloud, Lila Vance. My biological mother. Died 18 days after I was born. Not from some baby illness but from childbirth complications. "You lied, Sarah. For 22 years, you erased her." Sarah finally lost her composure, her face twisting into a hideous sneer. She was weak. She couldn't survive, she couldn't give Mark what he needed. "I did. I stepped in, I gave you a home, I gave him a family. What thanks do I get? You digging up relics from the dead." Her confession, shouted across the sunroom, was chilling. It wasn't about love, it was about victory. A victory over a deceased rival. "You didn't give Dad a family, Sarah. You trapped him and you stole my history out of pure, jealous vanity. You are not my mother. You are a usurper." I threw the diary open to the page where she confessed her intent to erase Lila's memory. Her eyes went wide, realizing the extent of the evidence I possessed. The silence in the room was deafening, filled only with the raw, exposed truth of her 20-year-long deception. Mark finally spoke, his voice barely above a rasp. "Anya, please. Let me explain." He was still avoiding Sarah's gaze, but his attention was now entirely focused on me. "There is nothing to explain, Dad. You let a grieving widow, a desperate father, be manipulated by a woman who saw your tragedy as an opportunity. You should have told me the truth the moment I was old enough to understand, but you chose comfort over honesty." Tears streamed down his face, genuine tears of regret, not just fear. He recounted the harrowing months after Lila's death. He was drowning in despair, unable to cope with a newborn. Sarah, Lila's cousin, had been a pillar of strength, but quickly the strength turned into demands. She told him she loved him, but she couldn't live under Lila's shadow. She confessed she couldn't have children herself and wanted to raise me as her own, erasing all traces of the past. She threatened to leave, Anya. To take you away and hide you if I ever mentioned Lila's name. I was weak. I was terrified of losing the only two people I had left. I traded the truth for what I thought was stability. "I am so sorry." His admission felt like the breaking of a long, terrible spell. For the first time, I saw him not as a distant, spineless father, but as a man who had suffered immense loss and then been exploited in his vulnerability. Sarah, sensing her control slipping away, began to rage, accusing Mark of destroying their life and me of being an ungrateful, disloyal child. But her words were hollow now. The power of her deceit was gone. I looked at Mark, and slowly, cautiously, I saw a path toward forgiveness. But Sarah. Her time in this manufactured family was over. The exposure needed to be surgical and public. Sarah thrived on reputation and social standing. Her entire life was built on presenting the perfect facade of a devoted wife and mother to the wealthy community we lived in. I knew exactly when and where to strike. Sarah was the chair of the annual Children's Trust Gala, a massive charity event attended by hundreds of influential people, scheduled for the following Saturday. She had spent months crafting a presentation about the importance of family bonds. It was the perfect stage for the truth. I contacted a few close family friends, people who had known Mark and Lila before I was born, and discreetly arranged a private meeting before the gala began. I showed them the photograph of Lila, the birth certificate, and selected excerpts from the diary detailing Sarah's deliberate campaign of erasure. The shock and sadness on their faces confirmed everything. They remembered Lila, and they remembered the sudden, confusing disappearance of her memory after Sarah married Mark. The night of the gala, I waited until Sarah was on stage, basking in the applause. Mark was seated next to me, rigid with fear but prepared for the outcome. As Sarah began her scripted speech about the joy of raising a beloved daughter, I stood up and walked toward the stage. I didn't interrupt her speech, but I stood silently at the foot of the stage, holding up a beautifully framed copy of the photo of Lila, Mark, and me, the one Sarah had hidden for 20 years. The subtle ripple of confusion grew into a full-blown wave of murmuring as people began to recognize the woman in the photo, Lila Vance, Mark's first, tragically deceased wife. The ripple became a tidal wave when one of the family friends I had spoken to stood up and calmly announced that the woman Sarah was referring to as her daughter was actually the biological child of the late Lila Vance, and that Sarah had systematically suppressed the truth for 2 decades. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Sarah looked down at me and the photo, her face contorted in a silent scream of betrayal, recognizing her total defeat. Her meticulously constructed life crumbled in that single, terrible moment. Mark stood up then, walking onto the stage, not to defend Sarah, but to finally own his truth. He publicly confirmed the story, apologizing profusely for his cowardice and the 20 years of lies. Sarah tried to deny it, yelling that I was a liar, that I was mentally unstable, but the proof was there, and the word of Mark, now free from her control, held weight. She fled the stage, humiliated and ruined. Within weeks, the divorce papers were filed. Sarah lost her social standing, her marriage, and the manufactured life she had stolen. I finally got to know the memory of Lila, my true mother, through the friends who loved her and the few belongings Mark had hidden away. I forgave my father, and we are slowly rebuilding an honest relationship, honoring Lila's memory together. The pain of the past remains, but the lies are gone, replaced by a profound, if bittersweet, truth. Thanks everyone for watching. If you liked this, please subscribe to the channel Dramatic Zone, leave a like, and write in the comments which country you are from. Stay tuned, there will be a new story tomorrow.